Hi.
Hi.
Here we are. It feels normal this year, or somewhat normal. So we're really happy to be doing this little talk with two of my great friends and colleagues, Blaise Magniere, the violinist of the Avalon Quartet, and Christina Dahl, known as Tina, here in these parts, who is a fantastic pianist and on faculty at Stony Brook University and just about to become a chair of that music department. But I'll ask you about that in a minute. So we just thought we'll get together and talk a little bit about being here this summer and about what we've done during the pandemic and what it felt like to continue on with what we do during really strange and ominous time. So welcome, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So how was the pandemic? In professional terms, it changed so much, so many things for us so quickly.
Right.
And I'm sure we all had different experiences with that in some ways.
Yes, and I don't know if we can use the past tense yet.
Yeah,
How
correct.
was the pandemic? Because I think we're definitely still in it, and I think there are a lot of still lingering questions that we're going to have to deal with professionally, academically in the year coming forward. Well, I mean, as you both know, I live in Cleveland and have done for more than 20 years and commuted to New York for my job at Stony Brook and to come out here. So on March 13th, I drove home from Stony Brook and remained in Cleveland then for 15 months without leaving, which is a totally different experience for me. And everything that I had in that year and a half was canceled in terms of professional engagement. So I did do some of those things online, and that means I purchased, as I'm sure all of us did, recording equipment. I had to learn how to use various modalities to do that, and get a big monitor, get my piano room set up for teaching on a monitor, but also to record myself. So for me, thank God, both my husband and I stayed healthy, and we got vaccinated as soon as we possibly could in March. But it was a kind of unusual and interesting period of really tunneling into our home, our neighborhood, the very few people that we saw, we didn't at first for 6 months, and then just all of this really intense interaction with musicians and colleagues and family members actually via Zoom and this other method of connecting. So I felt very busy and engaged, but in a really weird and isolated way.
Mm-hmm. What about you?
Well, my experience was in some ways similar, but in other ways very different. There was one day, it may have been March 13th, when literally all our performances were canceled. It was ringing from morning till evening saying, this is canceled, this is canceled. And it was quite devastating. And I stayed quite hopeful at first. I shouldn't have been that optimistic, but I kept thinking that this would go away in a few months. And so at first, I tried to stay very busy, creative, both on the violin, but also in composition. I decided to try and write some music because I was stuck at home and I hadn't done that for many years. And I said, well, this is a perfect opportunity to try new things. So I wrote a little quartet piece, a little violin piece, and just tried to get busy that way. And at first, of course, absolutely everything was online. And so I really didn't meet my students. And that was a tough transition, but it felt like a temporary thing and I could deal with it pretty well. Then, when it became clear that this wasn't going away in any time soon, I started having a much harder time trying to figure out how to deal with this long term. But our school made a very different choice from yours. We decided to do, I teach at Northern Illinois University, and this music department decided to do most of the courses in person. So we had to arrange everything in a completely new way. We created spots in the hall for each student, which was separated from each other by at least 6 feet. We all wore masks, of course, and we had these 30-minute periods during which we could play, and then an airing out period. And the organizational aspect was very, very complicated. It was wonderful to be able to do things in person. I mean, as much as I learned some things from teaching over Zoom, on listening in new ways, on finding new ways to teach, I was really missing certain aspects that cannot be done over Zoom. And so that was great, that part. And also being able to see the students who were often struggling with a lot of issues, and I think it was helpful for them to be able to meet other people, especially new students. There was a first year in the university, they were meeting no one, and it was really tough for them. So that was good in some ways, but also extremely difficult to organize. And from week to week, the schedule would be completely different. Things would close down and so on. And it went well the first semester, but for some reason with the second wave, by around February, I think everybody just couldn't take it anymore. Then it was a bit of just struggling through the last few months. I don't know, I think a lot of people felt that. I have two children. Marie Wang plays in a quartet with me and teaches at NIU. And they were doing all the schooling at home. And that was also very tough for them, and we had to balance that with our own teaching. So I think that was part of the reason why it became really hard by February. But now, I mean, I certainly feel great being here. I mean, it's a completely new feeling. It feels like I'm kind of awakening right now. So that's wonderful.
How about you, Oksana?
Well, we were essentially completely shut down at Pacific Lutheran University where I teach, and it was all online. And once we got little allowances starting in March and April to come in and do some in-person teaching under the similar regulations, you know, short lessons, airing out the room, but it seemed terribly inefficient to wait so long and no place to go. So I basically finished it out online. And you know, I don't know if it's different for different instruments. It took a while to figure out how to listen on Zoom. How, you know, I had to rely all of a sudden more also on visual cues, because often I realized when I listened to students, I close my eyes, you know, and so now I couldn't close my eyes because the sound was so not really accurate, so I had to look. So there are certain things that I think we just learn how to do differently and to cope with this, but I think strangely they improved. And, you know, I guess it just shows how resilient we are and how adaptable we can be if necessary. I mean, it's a little bit of the same experience here. Last summer, Tina, you were not here because you were still in Ohio during the pandemic. But Blaise and Marie were here, and we had a festival, but the festival without people. So just like our support staff here learned how to set up cameras, buy equipment, and make this work in a remote way. So essentially the same for us, just trying to adapt to what was possible.
I do think this question about what happens in a lesson, how you interact with a student is so interesting. So someone we all know is my colleague at Stony Brook, Gil Kalish, famous American pianist. He's been teaching for 50 years. His apartment in New York is set up so that there's not wireless close to his piano. It's one of these railroad car configurations where his office and computer is way at the back. And so he did all 15 months without ever touching the instrument.
I didn't realize that.
Only talking to the students.
That's amazing.
And you know, early on I felt so hampered by that. And I got my room set up with a big monitor and mics so that I could move to the instrument, demonstrate a lot. I even tried to get camera angles where I could get onto my hands more closely. But he said he found it a really interesting artistic question, how to teach that way, and he enjoyed it. He actually said he felt also that he was more emotionally connected to the students because there is a kind of immediacy across Zoom, but there's also, it's kind of a safe space. You're not in the room together. So I think things that you could discuss that might seem, I don't know, too deep or personal, like if we're just sitting like this, but if we have a little bit of the barricade of a computer, we might be able to do that. So that was, I mean, I can't speak for his experience, but that's how he's described it to me.
That's incredible.
Which is quite unique, I think.
It is.
Yeah, I can't imagine, but I suppose it's a complete paradigm shift. But
Well, and I think he was always someone, in terms of just comparing our own teaching, who is more, in a way, fundamentally attentive to the score than I am. And he also deals a lot in rhythm, which is something I think that can still be conveyed across Zoom, even when timbre is so bad, you know? And I'm so attuned to timbre, and that was really hard for me to get beyond in the Zoom format.
Well, I would say actually our quartet played for Gil Kalish a few times, and it was wonderful, incredibly helpful. So it shows beyond the instrument. It's not like he needed the piano to do that. So yeah.
So I'm curious about your kind of newfound, I don't want to say, parallel tracks to your career in which I know you so well. So for you, it's composition. Has quartet played those pieces you wrote?
Well, I wrote a 3-minute
quartet.
piece that's a companion piece to Beethoven's Opus 18 number 5, because we have been involved in a Beethoven cycle we were supposed to finish it actually in the last season, and then of course everything changed. So we have kind of lengthened our cycle, and we have changed all the programming. But we had the idea of having companion pieces to each Opus 18 quartet. There are 6 Opus 18 quartets, and we commissioned different composers to write one, but I decided to go ahead and try and write one myself. And I used to love composing in high school, and then I did a tiny bit more after that, and then I completely stopped. But I feel like as a performer, knowing what it feels like to compose is really interesting. It uses a very different part of the brain, and it's funny because it's strange to try to play your own piece in a weird way, because I feel like when I'm in the mindset of composing, I'm not at all thinking in the same wavelength. But understanding how hard it is to compose, first of all. You know, we just take it for granted sometimes. We play all these masterpieces, but just to realize the amount of craft that's involved, you know, in writing, and the incredible amount of facets that to composing. I mean, you have the large-scale structures. There's all kinds of sonority problems. There's so many levels of complexities, and then when you're trying to do it, then you really get a sense of how much is at stake. So.
What is your basic language? Like, how do you choose your pitches?
Well, okay, so what I did, if you want to talk about my specific composition, I tried to get an idea of using the structure of a melody from Beethoven, but using them as kind of pitch clusters or groups of pitches that show a general outline rather than using the actual language of Beethoven, and then going from that on the kind of large-scale rhythmic organization and pitch organization of a melody, and then play around with that. Because I don't compose much, it's kind of hard for me to have a really unique compositional style, so I kind of borrowed, I have to say, kind of ideas from various composers, but but I kind of try to use that as a beginning point, this melody from the last movement of Opus 18 number 5, to kind of have this kind of arc journey that kind of develops it and brings in kind of, I try to, well, one part that is fascinating is you talk about the craft, but then there's a whole emotional aspect. You know, what character do you want to bring out? And that is also really tricky. Does this make any sense in terms of a dramatic impact? And so that was also fascinating.
So would you care to extend it into 2022 so we can hear the companion piece and 18.5 of Beethoven next summer?
Well, we'll be playing it this summer in Chicago and Michigan.
Okay.
So.
And for you, Tina, you hit upon this incredibly complex administrative kind of stretch in your life, which I didn't really see coming.
Right, so a few years ago, well, I mean, it was sort of just a little bit of talk in our department, because our current chair, his wonderful man, Perry Goldstein, who's a composer actually, has done 3 consecutive stretches as chair, so 9 years. And he just indicated, you know, it's time. And as is typical in many, we're a big R1 public university, our department is sort of divided into cohorts. So there's a big performance aspect, and then there's a big academic aspect with PhD students. And traditionally, through the history of the department, our chairs and administrative leadership have always come from the academic side, never from the performance side. And I was kind of challenged by a colleague who didn't know he was challenging me a couple years ago, who made an offhanded comment that, well, you know, the performance faculty don't engage in leadership in the department. And it really got my goat. So I decided to kind of volunteer to do the stepping stone position traditionally for the chair in our department, which is graduate program director. We have about 243 students in our grad program. It's a big program. So I had thought that would be a tedious administrative job that would just teach me a lot of the workings of the department and prepare me to be the chair. But it turns out, maybe just because I was stuck at home without this like sort of central purpose of being a performing musician, I totally enjoyed it. And it's a lot of computer work. it's the student advocate position in the department in a way. It's the person who's really engaged in the curriculum of the grad students and trying to think about how their lives work. I mean, I have been in the Stony Brook department in some fashion since 1998. I was a grad student without a TA. I was a TA. I was a part-time faculty. I was a junior assistant professor on tenure track, an associate professor. Now I'm a full professor, and now I've been the grad director, and I will become the chair. I'm not sure anyone else in the university has made that particular arc from like soup to nuts. So yeah, it turns out I really like problem solving. And to me, to me, administration is just like an extension of practicing. I never liked to practice, so I always tried to be super efficient. And same with all of this stuff, I try to keep thinking, how could this be more efficient? And that's a really interesting problem. I don't know what the chair's job will be like. I think it's much, of course, more expansive. It's a bigger, has to have a bigger vision. It involves our undergrad program, about which I don't know a lot at the moment. But yeah, so it feels like skills I attained as a musician are very applicable to this, and to the human side of it, the HR side of it, you know, interacting with people, negotiating. It feels like chamber music to me, sort of. So anyway, my main goal for the past year was just don't mess things up, but it turns out then I got much more ambitious. So I'm starting out by saying with the chair's job also same, just don't mess it up, but probably, yeah. Anyway.
I imagine you'll make a great chair.
Yeah.
So, but you're still playing. And
I
you're
am,
trying to work it all and mash it into one life that's very busy.
And I'm so grateful actually to come this summer because as I think I've said to you already this week, it's forced me to come back into playing. And I realized, I don't want to just abandon that. My husband also started composing during this time. He's a brass player in Cleveland Orchestra, like quite a lot. And I saw there was a point in the pandemic where, because Cleveland Orchestra did not play for 15 months, at least with brass. The thing that was being filled by administrative work for me was, not there for him. So all of a sudden, in the morning, I'd get up early, 6:30, he'd already have been up, hour and a half writing. He wrote several brass trios, and he took many long walks in the middle of winter, like writing in his head. So that was pretty cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's incredible. See, I've been probably one of the luckiest people because of this place, during the pandemic, because it's so remote and it's kind of so isolated and so beautiful and has such support structure built in that we've been able to produce some performances and I've been able to bring some people cautiously, with quarantining during the worst of the pandemic.
Yeah, I was going to say, when was the first time you started doing it? Was pretty soon after shutdown.
It was last summer.
Yeah.
Last summer. And
only
remember how we
months.
got here
Yes,
and we were here for 10 days and now masks, staying 6 feet away from each other and after flying. And then we eventually started rehearsing and produced things that I think were really meaningful for people last summer and to us because we were so cooped up for several months. But then during the year, as things started to maybe get a little easier, and particularly the vaccinations, we were able to continue this work. And so I'm really grateful to this place and to Eric and Rebecca for keeping this place viable and vibrant.
I think I told you this before, but it's really worth saying. Many, many people did live streaming this past year and a half. I didn't see anything that was at the level of quality that you guys did last summer. Just the quality of the video, the stability of the feed, the performances were so excellent. I mean, it was really thrilling from Cleveland to see all these concerts and to see how well done they were. I mean, it's just really, I was super proud of the place.
Well, thank you. All credit is due to the people who are now filming us behind the cameras. We're not in front of the picture, but they're still here and still doing this. It really has been impressive. And it's so good to be here this summer because it feels, like you said, it feels a little bit more hopeful. We're not quite there yet, but we're really trying to continue to be safe, but do something that has meaning to all of us. And one of the things I was really, besides continuing to play because of this place that gave me this opportunity last year during the shutdown, was also doing a lot of listening and thinking about programming and repertoire and what we want to bring to Icicle. I think our awareness that we must be fully representative of all people in our art hit us very hard over a year ago, and this shouldn't have been such a critical point at which we started doing it, but in a sense it was because of the events of May of last year. So I think we've all been trying very genuinely and arduously to learn the music, or learn of the music that's out there available to us that we're able to bring to the festival, and just showcase composers of all creeds and all different walks of life. And I think it's really truly great to hear those pieces, worked in with the other repertoire that we know.
Because I think it's worth saying and just mentioning that it's a staple kind of programming paradigm for summer festivals to think, hey, we just need to play like the top 25 classical music pieces that always get played. Otherwise, people aren't going to be interested to come in the summer when everybody's feeling kind of lazy intellectually. That's been a standard paradigm. I remember at a festival I was at for years, they said, just program the Trout every summer.
Nobody told me that.
Right, but and it was never that way here.
Right.
But like you're saying, it's such an opportunity to go way, way, way beyond that idea, and to bring your audience along with you, especially if they're also listening from around the world via live feed like they are now.
Yeah, well, we discovered a lot of new works this year, wonderful works. After the pandemic hit and after the events of May of last year, we decided that we needed to redo our programming completely. So we were going to do just a standard Beethoven cycle with a few bagatelles, and we decided we really have to have a more diverse representation in our programming. So we went and looked for new works to program alongside the Beethovens, and we found a great variety of wonderful works. So I'm so happy this happened.
And there's so many databases now being collected by various sources, organizations of works by BIPOC composers, and they're really fantastic. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but we can link it to this, or somehow, if people are interested, we can attach the information. So there is a lot of great work being done in that direction.
I mean, it's a struggle for our whole profession, because we pull a large body of our repertoire from a kind of standard Western classical European tradition. And it is a beautiful one that requires a lot of skill to engage with. But doing that can't erect sort of barricades to anyone listening or participating in our art. So that's the key element, is how do we bring people in as kids to learn this art, and as composers and as players and performers to have equal access to what we've been fortunate to have access to. So.
And I think, you've, Tina, mentioned that several times, not in this context necessarily we're talking about, but, this feels like a safe place to do things and experiment with things. And I think it's true, and especially if you establish some certain amount of trust with the audience, which I think we have, because you've been here for 20 years. Right. You've been here for nearly 20 summers too. So then I guess they trust it's going to be good no matter what the name is on the program. And it seems to work.
Yeah, you buy into an experience, which is coming to this beautiful, really special hall, and you're going to sit for an hour or an hour and a half, and even if something happens that you're not into for 2 minutes or 30 seconds or 5 minutes, in this space, you can space out and look up at the mountains and the sunset. It's a perfect place for art where you can have the experience that you have in listening to it. Exactly. You're really not trapped, but what's much more likely to happen is that you see a name of a composer you don't recognize, and you don't expect to fall in love with a piece by someone you've never heard, which already has happened this summer. We've been hearing from audience members. It's very special.
Yeah, it certainly is a privilege. So. I just have questions just off the top of my head. So Blaise, you and the quartet, it's a long standing group, you play a lot. Now, do you have any, if you were given, let's say, 6 months without the quartet, let's say, to learn music that you wanted to learn, what would that be? Bach sonata cycles?
Wait, are you asking Blaise as a violinist?
As a
not
violinist, as a solo violinist.
That's a good question. There is so much I would love to do, of course. Well, I did do a kind of a Bach cycle. I tried to do it alongside the quartet. I have been wondering somewhere in me about like playing some of these pieces and learning all the Icicle, which I don't know all of them, the Icicle solo sonatas. I've only played some of them, but also trying to write some pieces for violin as well and try to play them along just to try new things, just to expand my mind. Yeah, this is for solo violin. I unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to have somebody to collaborate through the year where I am on piano. So I would love to do that, but that's something. Yeah, that would be.
If only you knew some pianists.
Yes, that would be amazing.
What would I learn if I were? Well, that's a weird question for a pianist because we can
Learn
do
just
what we
about
want.
anything.
Yeah,
We do whatever we
exactly.
want, right?
But don't you have penchant for certain things and, you know,
I do.
what feels right to practice?
Well, so the interesting thing is, I think I have, say, a strength that's in certain areas or stuff that I do well, but then people ask me to do things outside my comfort zone, and it turns out I'm better at those things. I mean, years ago, that happened with my husband. I was, every summer at Easter Music Festival, I played a concerto, and I was, you know, they give us a choice, Schumann, or, you know, I'd say Rachmaninoff, whatever. One summer, Rick said, why don't you do a Mozart concerto? And I had this sort of thing about Mozart at the time. I was like, really? And so then I queried a colleague who said, he's a really good teacher. He's like, you should learn an early Mozart, E flat, called the Jeune Homme. I was like, I don't even know that concerto. So I learned that concerto, and that became such an important summer for me, coming back into Mozart and then falling in love with it, and then feeling like I had an aptitude for this music. So it's the best thing for me is if somebody just assigns me stuff. Like you asked me to do the late Scriabin, and I just hadn't thought about doing those. And then I learned, or Rager, that trio this summer was, I never would have, you know, ferreted it out. And
But you know the craziest thing of all? The request. Remember what that was? The first time you came to Icicle, on a whim I said, hey Tina,
was a joke.
How about you learn both opuses of Rachmaninoff, Etudes Tableau, opus 33 and 39? She's like, yeah, sure.
And I learned them specifically for my...
And I think it was 4 or 3 months before I had to
I
play
know.
them. So 2 gigantic sets of very challenging etudes.
Right.
It's great to hear them as a
Yeah, I guess...
continuity.
Yeah, so for me, really, it's just basically saying yes is the key. Just try not to have any bias. And I think, I don't know if you have the same experience. I think you probably do. Once you put the work in to learn a piece, you end up loving it, even if you didn't at the outset.
Yes,
I mean, the
absolutely.
biggest experience like that for me in the past 5 or 6 years is at a different festival that I go to where I was assigned the Stravinsky Concerto for 2 pianos. And as you know, I really don't love neoclassical Stravinsky. In fact, it's not too strong a word to say that I usually loathe it. And we had about probably, the pianist and I, 12 to 14 rehearsals, and it took us about 7 or 8 before we looked across the pianos at each other and were like, I really like this piece. And I said, do you think we have Stockholm Syndrome? Because we've been trapped in this room day after day, and now we're starting. But it's in the learning of a piece that even,
it becomes yours in a way. I mean, you start to live
I've
with
had
it.
that
and then
experience
it's
so
just,
many times.
I know, absolutely.
So you guys are both fantastic teachers. So, and this is sort of a nice segue into that. So what are some of the key things that are very important to you in your teaching?
Go ahead.
You want me to start with that one?
And then I'll be like, what Blaise said.
Ooh, that is well, the teachers always say that, I think, but this is what's so hard as a teacher is not to just teach the way you play. So the main thing is to find the right amount of advice that allows the students to fulfill their potential and find their own voice. And this is where it gets complicated with how much to demonstrate or not to demonstrate, and also at what level do you want to do that. So I have found that for me, having a lot of work away from just playing has been very helpful. Just being able to conduct, sing, like sense where you want the music to go, because violinistically the pieces are often so challenging, and then the technique just gets so much in the way of the vision. And once the vision is clear, then you work on the technique, and then you know what you are striving for. But it's so hard because often we're just working without knowing what we really want to produce. And I think that may not be the case so much for piano, but I feel like just executing each note on violin takes so much of so many physical aspects to each note that we kind of get stuck in that very easily.
What about you?
My teaching?
Yeah.
Well, I think my teaching is probably a little bit closer in terms of the age group that I'm working with to Blaise than to you, because you mostly work with graduate students, right?
Yeah, that's different.
So I get a lot of students and who are incredibly interesting individuals, because it's a liberal arts school. So, and oftentimes these students do not wish to be a piano major, but they play on a really high level. So for me, teaching kind of starts with building trust always with the student, and of course getting to know that student. So it takes me about 6 months to just sort of discern with any kind of nuance as to what would be helpful for that student at that particular time. It's not necessarily important for me to make them sound good at the start, but rather to kind of get a sense for what the long term, I think, is for us in the 4 years that we have, or 2 years that we have, if that makes any sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I think even though I teach, pre-professional, professional grad students, I think the same basic notion applies, because as we all know, even sort of the best players, whatever that means, often struggle to make a name in our profession. So, and there's really no guarantees about how you'll work as a musician. So putting that aside as a pressure, the pressure to get a student a job or to have them succeed in some external way, frees us up, I think, to do what you're talking about, Oksana, which is to engage with the student where they are. I know both Gil and myself in the piano program at Stony Brook have thought one big goal is to get people out of the program, because they're mainly doctoral students, able to learn any piece of music on their own. I mean, not to need a teacher. So that means pushing them out, teaching in such a way that they're not increasingly dependent on us.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, Oksana, sometimes that dependency can happen when a teacher is able to make a student sound really good. So they come to the lesson like, make me sound good, but that's a kind of a little bit of a trap, I think. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, I believe good technique is doing what you want stylistically and artistically in the easiest way possible. So I do have a lot of focus on the physical.
Yeah.
I think I believe the opposite of you, Blaise. I think if a person can actually play the notes, that's how they'll find what they want to say. I don't think people really know what they want to say until they can actually engage with the piece.
Oh,
So I do have
well.
students who will come in and play really blank, and then I'll say, what's going on? And they'll say, well, it's almost like they don't have the right to have an opinion yet because they can't really play it. And I'm like, plunge into the piece, make mistakes in it, and then you'll find your way. I don't know, but that's just
Well, that's
personal.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, but the instruments are so
Yeah, I
unbelievably
think
Totally.
things
I
don't
mean, I
necessarily
know.
apply.
Different.
Yeah.
It's so hard
because
to
you
apply one
just
to the
you
other.
can sound so bad on a violin, and you can
Yeah.
kind of sound good when you're playing badly on a piano. So it's a really big
Yeah,
difference.
it's weird because I think our hearing gets really distorted on violin in a way that it doesn't so much on piano because we're so like even rhythm will be we won't realize what we're doing rhythmically, which I think is less the case maybe. I don't know.
It is. Yeah, there's something so very kind of intuitive and natural about playing the piano, our position to the instrument, and frankly, it's easier. I was a violinist also for a lot of years, and piano is just easier. The music we play, not necessarily, because we play highly contrapuntal, complex textures, so we're playing the whole quartet, and that requires a certain intellectual and artistic sophistication, I think. But in terms of physically playing the piano, so much easier. No intonation to deal with.
I know, it's that instrument baffles me. Even cello is so much easier, isn't it? The violin.
Yeah.
It's really
this position.
Well, part of the problem is you can't just sink in. It's so easy to use too much muscle on violin, and so everything is super sensitive. But some of the music is hyper expressive and intense, and you just want to give it all. But like that's when you just crush it all. And then this is the problem.
We've heard pianists who play like that too.
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody
But
likes,
it's-
nobody likes that.
Yeah. I mean, letting go in order to express is sort of like a key tenet of Eastern philosophy, and it's such a deep idea, you know, that you need to relax in order to play with intensity, or you need to, you know, come away from the sound in order to really make your point. There's so many things which aren't necessarily intuitive. I played a Brahms, one of my first Brahms quintets, and you know how fun it is to play that piece for the first time. It's just like, you know, and especially for me when I was 19 or 20, and I played a performance at Peabody where I was like, walked off stage like, just felt like, man. And then people came back and were like, great job. And so finally, I asked my boyfriend at the time who was recording, like, what happened? It's such a lukewarm response. And he was like, I think you enjoyed the piece more than the audience did. And it sort of didn't compute at first, but you know, I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, is that where this whole "don't ever say good job to anybody who just play a concert" came from?
I think it might have. That's one of my pet peeves.
Well, it's mine too.
Well, it's so perfunctory. Good
I know.
job.
I know.
Good job. Just like you said, bravo.
It's lazy. I think at the core, that's what it is. Well, it's so fun to talk to you guys. So, because people are getting to know you, and of course they know you on stage. So, Blaise, what are some of your hobbies or
Hobbies. Well, one thing I was able to do during this year in the pandemic is ski, because that's one of the few outdoor activities that's really not that dangerous in the pandemic. So, of course, I didn't have many opportunities to go far. So, unfortunately, I come from Illinois,
You're very
so
flat
that's
state.
not. But
So is it cross country or is there like a
no,
tiny hill?
yeah, there were small hills. But you know, I have two younger children, so I went with them. But I love skiing. It's one of my favorite
Well, come back here in
activities.
the winter.
That would
Yeah,
be great.
Surrounded by
that's
that.
great.
Yeah.
What about you? Not skiing.
Golf.
Cool.
Another outdoor activity that's, very much like music, and we were able to do that. I mean, the weekend I got home March 14th in Northeast Ohio, not usually golf weather, but we clambered onto a course where there's still little patches of snow, and so. How about you?
Oh, I think it's cooking for me.
Yeah.
My ideal day would be, you know, a few hours of practicing and then making an elaborate meal.
Which you did a lot, I think, during the pandemic.
Yeah, it was really great, you know, with a little wine going on the side. It's fantastic. It's a way for me to relax.
Both you and I mean, in our family situation, we didn't get any takeout for probably at least a year, right?
We didn't.
Just
no.
12 months of
I know.
cooking every
Straight
single
cooking.
night. Yeah.
It got a little tedious because
It
after
did.
a while, what meat? Okay, well, here's
Right.
there is a 4. What do we do tonight? But still, you know, it's kind of fantastic. And what's even more fantastic is being here for 4 weeks for me and not having to do a stitch of cooking because
Yeah.
we have such an incredible
Eating
chef on
this
campus.
delicious food.
So that's really great. Well, we'd better go off and rehearse, but it's really fun
Okay.
to talk to you.
wonderful.
Thank you. Oksana, as always, thank you so much for having the artistic vision for this place and bringing us back summer after summer. It's a huge amount of work on your part during the school year when you have a full-time job doing something else. And so we really really do appreciate it.
Yes,
I know that,
absolutely.
and I thank you
Yes.
for saying that. And I also would like to thank everybody here at Icicle and Rebecca
Yes.
Riker for her vision, and Eric and people who basically made the whole last year possible and made us viable. I think Icicle Creek is one of the rare organizations that actually has kind of sailed through the last 15 months with a high degree of success.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
And it's because of people like that. So
Yeah.
we're lucky
Yeah.
to be here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
See you at the piano.
Bye.